Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. It is I, Daniel Strauss of Talking Points Memo, with my partner in crime, Betsy Woodruff of the Daily Beast, and we are here today for a lightning round of Blogging Heads. Partially because Betsy was at the TPM rooftop party last night, and we're all a little hungover.
So we're going to make this very efficient
Yeah,
and
we're gonna be very efficient.
maximum information, minimum
In
time,
minimum amount of time.
high output, low input. That's the
Yeah. Um, High impact, low output. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway,
whatever.
okay.
Words
We are
hard.
starting off today as we speak. I mean, the thing that's going on today that's good, Betsy, is that there are a few stories that are like happening right now. So we're gonna hit those very quickly. And
News developing as we
yes,
speak.
it's developing as we speak. One is Rand Paul, presidential candidate, senator from Kentucky, is filibustering Patriot Act renewal right now. Like right
Like
now
right this minute,
on the
right
Senate
now.
floor. And I'm
What do
sorry,
you think?
again, I
What's your
have to
take?
think in the 2016, I immediately go, what does this mean for 2016? And I just want to say, like the conventional thing, he's reasserting his libertarian roots, you know? I mean, he's making it clear that he's still, the same old Randy we know that, like, is against warrantless wiretapping and the expansion of the surveillance state.
What I am most interested about regarding Senator Paul's filibuster is how his fellow 2016ers push back against it, particularly Marco Rubio, because Rubio wrote an op-ed, I forget where it ran, maybe Politico, but I forget. He wrote an op-ed arguing that we need to actually permanently extend the NSA warrantless wiretapping program because it's so important for national security. So there's a very interesting contrast developing between Rand Paul as sort of a dogged libertarian, willing to oppose the Patriot Act, even as we're facing an increasingly violent situation in the Middle East. Rand Paul saying, I don't care about, possible ramifications that this could have on that. We're going to change how the Patriot Act gets renewed, versus Marco Rubio saying the number one priority that any president needs to have is safety. And if we're not safe, there's no point doing anything else. And therefore, everyone needs to sort of, cool their jets about this NSA stuff, and we need to renew it. So I think what's going to be very, very interesting is seeing how this plays out, seeing the extent to which the other guys push back against him. I'm really interested in what Ted Cruz says, because historically he's been more on the side of Rand Paul on some of this stuff. But in terms of foreign policy, he's a little bit less defined than either of them are. So I'll be very curious to see how he responds. If he goes to the Senate floor, if he differentiates himself from Senator Paul on some of these libertarian issues, that's going to be interesting. And more so than Cruz, I'm super excited to see what Jeb Bush says, because he also has had some tough ups and downs talking about foreign policy stuff in the last week.
Rough fortnight on foreign policy.
So I think this isn't just about 2016. Like, obviously this involves the presidential race, but this is also about policymaking in the United States and how the Republican Party understands itself and sees itself in a rapidly changing and really unprecedented national security situation. Does the GOP as a whole and do the Republican base come down on the side of sort of Fourth Amendment absolutism, or do they come down on the side of safety at all costs? So that's what I'm most interested about here. We know what Rand Paul is going to say. He's talked about this before.
I mean, you clearly have the policy part of this down. I mean, one of the things that I think the 2016 sort of specter does play a role on this that you can't ignore, because like if Cruz even were to like be right on Rand, he can't really come out and seem like Rand Paul is leading, right? That's just not.
What's interesting about Cruz is that he hasn't been super antagonistic to Rand Paul on the campaign trail. Hasn't really gone after him. Hasn't tried to make an enemy there. In New Hampshire, there was a Rand Paul cutout, and as Cruz was walking through the exhibit hall, he just goes up to it and puts his arm over the cutout and lets reporters get pictures, and he's just kind of like, ha, ha, ha. And then one of his staffers, Amanda Carpenter, tweeted out, #Stand with Rand, Ted Cruz does. So there's really not, at least from 5,000 feet, there really doesn't seem to be a ton of animosity between Cruz and Paul.
I doubt there's gonna be, right? Because they were like the three it's Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, right? The little triumvirate for the shutdown. So, I guess
And Cruz and Paul have simultaneously bucked Republican orthodoxy on other issues too. I think they both favored Senator Gillibrand's military sexual assault proposal, which goes against what the military wanted. So it's very unusual to see two Republicans come down in favor of that.
We've hit this before.
It's so interesting, though. It's fascinating. Cruz and Paul also both were co-sponsors of Senator Mike Lee's criminal justice overhaul. So on some of these issues where you'd expect Republicans typically to be hard on crime, pro whatever the Pentagon says, Paul and Cruz have both been on the opposite end. And I don't expect that to change. So it's interesting.
It would be weird. I mean, it would be weird to have. I mean, I guess on the one hand, like Rubio has always wanted foreign policy to be his area, right? And it would just be weird. I just never I always figured that Chris Christie or Jeb Bush would be like the neocon arguing on the other side to someone like Rand Paul here. But from what you're saying, I can totally see Rubio and Rand Paul going at it.
Totally, without a doubt.
They're not super well connected. They both rose up on a Tea Party wave, but it would be interesting. And it's also interesting because Rubio is his stock is on the rise. Everyone's saying Rubio is dangerous, or he's in the top tier of candidates right now. Mm-hmm. Do you think? Okay, but back to the policy. Do you think this filibuster is going to is that going to stop it?
One of my colleagues was saying earlier that, and I'm not an expert on the ins and outs of Patriot Act policy at all. One of my colleagues was saying earlier that even though the Patriot Act doesn't expire until June 1st, the NSA wiretap programming they'd have to start sunsetting it as soon as Friday if there's not a long-term solution. So Rand Paul really kind of is running out the clock here. And there's a possibility that just postponing any sort of reauthorization vote, any sort of procedural vote, could have, at least in theory, some sort of impact on how the NSA functions. Although, again, disclaimer, the ins and outs of Patriot Act policy are not my wheelhouse. But I think this is more than a symbolic gesture, right? This is going to have more. This has the potential to have more policy punch than in 2013 when Ted Cruz talked for 20 plus hours.
Yeah,
but it wasn't accomplishing anything on a procedural level.
No, it wasn't. It won the praise of Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
And I think it was pretty popular.
Yeah.
Let's move on a second to what else has been going on the campaign trail, which is after how many days of, very, very coordinated and tailored press events. Hillary Clinton actually took questions from the media and said basically nothing at all. But she's taking questions.
What a hero. What a champion for democracy. Such a good news.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Betsy, I don't know about you here, but I'm sort of I'm ambivalent on the not taking questions now thing. Of course she's going to have to take questions eventually. Most of these campaigns haven't really laid out specific policy proposals yet. And why do that? You want to do it, when you know what the landscape is. It's a long 15 months. And I think we talked about this in the last episode. On the other hand, though, it would be nice, given that you are basically the nominee of the Democratic Party, to answer the press's questions.
I have two.
Especially on the emails, right? And especially on this Sidney Blumenthal story where a former Hillary advisor who was banned from working in the State Department for Hillary and in the White House was, as I understand it, emailing about Libya, and there's some shady dealings about that.
Yeah. So I have two thoughts on this. First, if you want to be president, you should answer questions from reporters. I mean, come on. That is so transparently obvious. And as a sub-point to that question, if there are a ton of pressing, important, significant questions with significant public policy implications that reporters have, you should definitely be answering questions from reporters. Come on. But my second thought on this is that Hillary not taking questions from reporters is hurting Hillary more than it's hurting the press
The Republic.
or what people know about Hillary Clinton. Because the best Hillary Clinton stories are not going to come from reporters sitting down with her and asking, if she feels oppressed because she's a woman. The best Hillary Clinton stories are going to come from people like David Sirota and other investigative reporters going through filings from the Clinton Foundation, finding background on Sid Blumenthal, digging up dirt that Clinton will never talk about in public, and getting stories that you just wouldn't find in an interview. So I think as a reporter, focusing most of your energy on everything besides what the candidate says is often the most productive way to go. Because when you talk to candidates, most of it's going to be nonsense. Most of it's going to be word salad. They're not going to say anything interesting, unless they're Scott Walker trying to redefine what the word flip-flop means. More likely than not, the stories that are really significant and important and the stories that actually help people understand what kind of president these candidates would make, those stories are going to come from looking at what candidates have actually done, looking at who candidates have worked with, looking at things that have actually happened in the real world, instead of what talking points does Hillary have to talk about her emails? Is she crafting her talking points correctly? Has she taken, that's important, but, journalism will be fine. Hillary Clinton could never talk to a reporter for the rest of this campaign, and there would still be tons and tons and tons of great journalism and great news stories on Clinton. So I think her sort of being in Fortress Scooby-Doo is more damaging for her than it is for anyone else.
And there were complaints about lack of access to Mitt Romney in 2012.
No kidding.
So this is, and there is no President Mitt Romney of the United States of America, and there never will be.
I mean, look, there were massive complaints about lack of access to Terry LaLand in Michigan, who was incredibly well-funded and could have been competitive, but whose campaign just kind of imploded. And a large part of that was because she became a joke among reporters because she wouldn't talk to anyone. It was like she was terrified of it. So,
and she was the only Senate race, the only sort of competitive Senate race where a Democrat won.
Yeah. Would have been a historic win for Republicans.
It would have. In Michigan, Senator Gary Peters, he's an actual senator now, but there were points in that cycle when Terry LaLand was the favorite, and people were like, we could win this thing.
Totally.
And
lots
Peters'
of money
campaign,
getting spent in Michigan. Republicans were dumping money in the state and just didn't go anywhere.
And the Peters campaign was not the most well-organized campaign. I can attest to that. Trust me.
Good to know. So that's how I feel about Hillary asking questions.
She's going to answer questions.
There's going to be tons of
I think
great
you're right.
Hillary stories
the
regardless.
important stories about Hillary are going to happen later. I think, Republicans are going to keep saying Hillary won't, answer the media's questions, but they don't really care. I mean, they want her to so they can fuel criticism, but
I think whether or not Hillary Clinton answers questions from reporters is one of the less interesting Clinton stories right now.
In Iowa. I know. Okay,
whatever.
In Iowa, New Hampshire. Let's also keep in mind that these candidates color their language and comments in these pivotal early primary states.
Oh, can I throw something else out too?
Yeah.
Here's another thing about Hillary not answering questions from reporters that I think is important. She not only is she not answering questions from reporters, but her events are entirely scripted and micromanaged so that the only quote-unquote real Americans who get to ask her questions are ones who are thoroughly vetted by the campaign beforehand. And that's something where it's just multiple layers of protection. You look at Jeb Bush. Bush has obviously sat down with prominent reporters and said things that, affect how people understand what kind of president he would be. But he's also taken a ton of questions from just random Republican primary voters in New Hampshire and Iowa. He does Q&As. He talks to normal people. He talks to goofballs. And often those people, the questions those people ask are just as illuminating as the questions that professional reporters ask. And that's good. That's how it should be. So the fact that Hillary Clinton, if I were a voter, I was going to vote in the Democratic primary, which I will not. But if I was voting in the Democratic primary, I think I would be doubly perturbed by the fact that she's not talking to unvetted voters, right? Mm-hmm. Whether or not you talk to the media, okay, a lot of that becomes sort of a DC circle jerk situation. Whether or not you talk to people off the street who are interested in talking to you without having your campaign staff vet them first, come on.
We'll see. I don't think Jeb Bush is the best lesson in the best argument. Jeb Bush's example of talking to random people is really a good
But
argument to
Jeb
make
Bush
to
hasn't
stop
gotten in
it.
trouble from talking to random people. He's gotten in trouble from talking to Megyn Kelly. He's gotten in
Had that
trouble
big
in
blow.
media
Well, he had that big
interviews.
blow up with the woman from Nevada who, like, I think gave an entirely incoherent question on, like, remember,
No, I don't
she
remember
said
this.
she was the one who was like, why are you blaming Obama on ISIS when you created ISIS or your brother created ISIS?
Okay. Yeah.
That was, so there's some good and the bad when you do that. I'm
Totally.
not defending it. I think you make a good point. I don't think the Clinton campaign is going to go around and be like, well, they're all taking questions and it's going super well for
Right.
Jeb.
Right. I'm not talking about like what's the best strategy. I'm talking
Right.
about like what is indicative of,
And
how somebody would
Obama did
govern.
that.
Yeah.
He won. You can still
Totally.
win on that point.
Yeah.
I
I'm
have
not
a feeling though it's gonna be a long campaign. She's gonna get asked a lot of questions, and you know what? She's been asked a lot of questions for like the past 20 years or
She's been asked
something.
questions like, do you think these attacks are only happening because you're sexist? Do you think people hate you because you're so successful? Like, okay, whatever. She hasn't had a really combative, acrimonious interview since her press conference about the emails. And she cut that press conference short, and it was a disaster.
It was not the best press
She
conference.
hasn't sat down for a serious, in-depth, heavy-hitting interview that I can think of since she announced.
Right.
And
I don't think she has yet.
Yeah. So anyway, lightning round. What's the next
lightning
thing?
round. Next thing, we're going to go back to Kentucky, where you had a story, and
yes.
this is the other developing story, as I feel so fancy right now. We're like in
Breaking
the news. Crazy story out of Kentucky that we've been tracking for a little while. So here's what happened. There's this guy named Agricultural Commissioner James Comer, who, correct me if I'm wrong, Betsy, was the front runner for the nomination for governor of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
He was accused by a former girlfriend of abuse and harassment and driving her to an abortion clinic, right?
Mm-hmm.
More women came forward, and all these women, including a state senator recently on Friday, happened to be supporters of one of Comer's rivals, Hal Heiner, a businessman. So Comer has had to rebuff those statements, and my understanding
Comer
is
said none of this is true.
Right,
this is all a conspiracy from Hal Heiner.
Yeah,
I'm a
so
good guy.
but it kind of it stuck around the Capitol. I think there are some shadowy sort of rumors about Comer and women like floating around the Kentucky State House.
Mm-hmm.
So we get into this primary, and the primary night was yesterday, and here's where it gets even more interesting. So as this is going on, a third candidate in the field, Matt Bevin, who challenged now Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in 2014, is also running for governor. Turns out this is really good for Bevin.
And Bevin didn't announce he was running until a couple hours before the filing deadline. He was just like, surprise, guys, YOLO, guess I'm going to run for governor.
And so now it's too close to call. I'm correct on this, right?
Yeah.
But
they're having to do
Bevin
canvassing.
could win the nomination.
Yeah.
And this is the part I like most. This is the part I love most, okay? Mitch McConnell has said today that he's going to support whoever gets a nomination. So technically,
Mitch McConnell knows full well. Bevin, they called the race for Bevin last night.
Could get the nomination, and Mitch McConnell could endorse Matt Bevin, who was the biggest pain in his ass the last cycle. Because Matt Bevin was at the vanguard of the Tea Party assault on the GOP.
You know what's interesting about Mitch McConnell here is that he is very good at making nice with former foes. He is a pragmatist. He gets things done, and if he's very much on the world of if you can't beat him, join him. And we saw this in 2010, right, when Rand Paul was running against McConnell darling Trey Grayson for the Republican Senate primary. And McConnell, worked for Grayson. His folks supported him. Was in the tank for him. And then when Rand Paul beat Grayson after what I think was a fairly acrimonious primary season, McConnell broke bread with Rand Paul, and now they're very close and they're buddies. And they have a really strong alliance that I would argue has substantially improved Rand Paul's presidential prospects. So on the one hand. On the
Yeah,
one
I think you're
hand, the
right.
prospect of
That's a
like
great point.
McConnell stumping for Matt Bevin is like a Meanwhile on Earth 2 joke. Very, very baffling and weird. But on the other hand, the idea that, this is not out of character for him. It would not be out of character for him to say,
That is a
I'm going to
fine.
make good with the second most powerful elected, or second or third most powerful elected official in my state, because that's what I need to do to get stuff done. So, it's interesting. It's fun.
It is interesting. I like and as I mean, my editor asked me this today. If these allegations hadn't come forward, I think they were really damaging, and they dominated
Oh
the
yeah,
cycle, and they
totally.
knocked down Comer from the frontrunner status.
Mm-hmm.
Bevin would have just lost another race, but we don't really know
Probably.
what's going to happen. It's like 83 votes apart or something.
Last I saw, yeah, they
Yeah,
called they
something like
called the race for Bevin last night, and then Western Kentucky counties came in, and everything changed, and now they're having to go back and double check the vote counts, and it's pretty wild. It's incredibly close.
I
So
love this. This
it's
is the
fun.
good politicking.
Totally.
You know, I mean, all of this, by the way, like, I just want to underscore the point that all these women, as far as I've seen, all three women who have come forward to say these are true, all happen to be Heiner fans or something.
Now, the woman who is the former girlfriend who moved to New York, she said she moved to wrote a letter to the Courier Journal
Joe
saying,
Girth, who's
yes,
a big political reporter for the
yes,
Courier Journal.
wrote a letter to them saying, here's what happened. This is what he did to me. It was incredibly traumatic. I moved to New York to get away from the memories. I'm not talking about it again. And I think she gave Heiner $100. So
Right.
she's certainly not a Heiner ally
Right.
or a
She's
Heiner
not
employee. I
like
mean, I think if I had an abusive
she's
ex-boyfriend and
not
there
a
was a guy,
surrogate.
right? Exactly. I think if I had
But
an
in the
abusive
letter, she also said, "I've
ex-boyfriend,
been encouraged by operatives
right,
and other people to come
right,
forward."
but that doesn't mean that she's lying. I think
No,
if I
no,
had an
I don't. No,
abusive
no, 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 no,
ex-boyfriend
no, no, no,
and
no.
he was
No one
running in a
thinks. I
oh
don't
yeah,
think.
obviously, right. If I had an abusive ex-boyfriend and he was running in a primary and his opponents were like, "Hey, maybe you should think about going forward," I would be like, "Huh, maybe you're right."
That's a
So
good point.
yeah, why not? So I think there are obviously anytime anybody talks about anything, there's going to be credibility questions, but I haven't seen a serious case to take these women's charges as false because of her relationship with the Heiner campaign.
No,
I don't think it's disqualifying at all.
I don't think so. I think these comments were pretty damaging
Yeah, no
to
kidding.
Comer. And then the interesting thing is going to happen is like the big question is what's going to happen. Like just like with the presidential election, we have a setup where we have a bunch of Republicans vying for the nomination, and then one de facto nominee, Jack Conway, who actually challenged. He ran against Rand Paul during Paul's first Senate race, and Conway's been waiting in the wings for whoever gets a nomination.
Mm-hmm.
I am not too clear at this time on who Democrats would prefer, Comer or Bevin.
I think Bevin.
Really, you think Bevin not beat up Comer?
Actually, that's a good point. I don't know. Well, Bevin is more. I don't know. Now that I think about it, I have no idea.
And this is the other thing.
Either way seems like good news for them. Right?
This is you're right, and this is the other thing I've talked with people since the 2014 election. Since it was such a big wave, if any of these Tea Party candidates who challenged incumbents and lost actually had won, they probably would have gotten the nomination. So there's no proof, I think, that Bevin is a complete loser in a general election.
Right, unelectable. Right.
Yeah, we haven't seen that yet. I mean, so he could be.
Who knows? Only one way to find out.
Only. So last one, Betsy, is I wanted to highlight a story I wrote earlier this week on gay adoptions.
Great story.
Thank you. We're going to put the links in there. And the crazy thing about this, I found in reporting this out, is that there is actually higher approval for gay people being allowed to adopt than for gay marriage. So to put that into perspective, all right, Americans are less okay with gay people being gay together than they are with gay people being in charge and shaping a little person's, a child's life. Okay? There is no logic to that.
I'm so confused. I'm so confused.
It's not like
I don't understand.
It's not like gay people in like a stable relationship are going to produce little gay babies. They literally can't. Okay, there's no like. There's no spawn. It makes no sense. But so in reporting this out, I talked to a demographer who specializes in LGBT statistics, and he basically explained that like the difference is that a lot of like adoptions and gay adoptions happen through federal courts or happen in courts, not necessarily federal courts. So the usual gay marriage bans don't apply, obviously.
Okay.
So in conservative parts of the country, it's easier for a gay couple to adopt a child or to live in that situation, and that means people are exposed to that more and see that fire and brimstone do not come down. They have not been smoted. The gay gene is not been impressed onto good heterosexual folk.
But you would think that whatever makes people, whatever demographic realities make people comfortable with gay adoption would also make them comfortable with gay marriage.
That's right.
That's what I find really, really baffling.
I think because there are parts of the country where, gay marriage is banned. So, you can't see...
You can see gay people living together in long-term committed monogamous relationships. Even if you can't see them, you can't see, like, a piece of paper hanging on their wall.
Or a ring, or, like, some kind of
sparkly They can still wear rings. They can still wear rings. It's not like there's a ban on gay people wearing rings.
That's a good point. Okay. Well, I don't know. I don't know why this is.
So I wrote... By that.
I mean, this is kind of a confusing... This could be a big stumble for the GOP in 2016. Democratic side is boring because Hillary's fine with it. Bernie Sanders is fine with it.
Yeah.
Jim Webb, who the fuck knows?
Not controversial among Democrats.
Yeah. Lincoln Chafee, whatever, and Martin O'Malley.
What does Lincoln Chafee think about gay adoption?
But for the
Just kidding. Just kidding.
It could be a good primary, Betsy. It could be a real weird and hilarious primary. It could be a hilarious Democratic primary. I mean, I think it might get really bloody and serious and mean on the Republican side, but on the Democratic side, it could get very silly very fast. All right? You know what I'm talking about.
Dear God, please let that happen.
I hope so. I mean, Lincoln Chafee, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton on the stage together debating.
O'Malley
with like George Stephanopoulos there. Or something, I don't know, or like Wolf Blitzer.
It would be so fun.
It would be amazing.
Good.
It's gold.
Good. I feel better about this now. I feel better about this now.
Yeah, me too. Actually,
Thanks, Daniel.
I feel pretty good about this. But for the Republican side, this might get difficult because not all of them have weighed in on this. The guys who have the big social cons of the past, like Huckabee and Santorum, have actually sort of hedged their language a little bit, and they sort of defer to, the truth is, I think the most stable environments for children are with their mother and father, implying that they're not so crazy about it, but it could be difficult. But how do you even wade into a topic like this, which is far more popular than gay marriage? And I think there's a new poll out today showing that gay marriage is at a record high of support among the American public. I have my suspicions that more of the field is waiting in the same way that Obama waited to do this sort of grand general election,
totally.
My views have evolved on gay marriage.
Guys.
So seeing as it's a divided primary,
or depending on how the Supreme Court rules. Wild card.
I mean, these candidates don't have a Joe Biden to mess that up like they did with Obama.
Right. And look, if the Supreme Court rules that gay marriage is a constitutional right, then problem solved. Did I freeze up there?
Yeah, a little bit.
If the Supreme Court rules that gay marriage is a constitutional right, then I think we'll hear a lot of Republicans say, "Oh well," and just kind of move on.
They've already said that. Like Carly Fiorina said, "Listen, I'm socially conservative. This is how I feel. But if the Supreme Court says this, I'm just going to go with that." And, listen, it's not clear how powerful or influential Carly Fiorina's constituency is right now. But that ain't nothing.
Totally.
And I assume that I would not be surprised, never assume in journalism, that that would be a response among many of the candidates. Like Jeb Bush on a gay adoption thing, when sort of gay adoption was legalized in his home state of Florida, after the fact said, yeah, you know what? That's how the courts ruled, and we got to obey that. And that was it. So
pretty easy.
Well, Betsy, we are at our time for this. That's pretty much it. Unless you've got anything else.
I'm glad we got this covered. I have no other feelings or opinions or takes.
Neither do I. I'm just trying to let's just get through another day. It's the best we can do.
Other day. Just love him.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
See you guys next time.
See ya.